Hello, Tim here. Welcome to Shop Talk with Tim. Today I'm going to talk about the grain of the wood. Now, there's three things that those of you that are just starting out need to have in mind when you're going to start carving wood. You need to first have an idea what you want to make. And then the important thing is to have suitable wood and proper tool or tools, whittling knife, such as one of these. And these are just your basic workhorse knives. And then once you have that, you need to have understanding of how the grain of the wood works. And that's a really important feature. So I'm going to focus on this episode particularly on how you start out a carving, just where you start, and then how the grain of the wood plays into that. When we talk about grain of the wood, what is that really? So just imagine wood being a bunch of straws, like if you can kind of imagine this. I'm going to shine a light through here, and you see that these are just like tubes. Your wood is like a series of tubes that brings the nourishment up to the leaves and all that out of the ground. And why is that important to know? Well, I'm going to show you actual wood samples in my small office there, where I have an enlarging machine and some end grain pieces of wood out of wood that I'm working with here, a basswood, pine, and an oak, that really shows what these tubes look like up close. So let's go in there for a second. So this is my small little office area, if you will. It's featured in part of my shop tour if you're ever interested in what's in here. To start with, I have little end grain pieces of wood like this. This is a piece of red oak, and I have a piece of white oak, and this is white pine, and then this is basswood. Now I'm going to zoom this up. I really like this machine because I use it a lot to look at end grain, to identify wood and other things that are of interest. Now this is red oak, and this is really obvious. You can see this just with the naked eye, but you see all these little holes here like straws. That runs all the way through the length of the tree. It's just really amazing to me how God made these trees to grow like they do when they're created, that these lines here are called medullary lines. I don't know if I say that right. And that's what creates the flecking when you see it on quarter sawn oak. Let me zoom it in up to 15. It gets a little fuzzy. So there's max enlargement, and you can just see like it's almost like a row of caves there. So that's end grain. So I'm going to move over to the white oak. You see the difference? Yeah, there's white oak. We'll go back to 12. Again, you see the medullary lines, but the holes are a lot tighter. So white oak was used for making whiskey barrels, and I think that's called tylosis. I'm not sure what that. It's filled in more of the holes there. Now, I'm going to go down to basswood, and you'll see the difference. The holes are really tiny. This is called this is a closed pore wood. So let me over here, you can see some of these holes. Let's go max. Yeah. Oh yeah, here we go. So you see the holes. Oops. See the holes here. I'm going to scoot over to white pine, and you see the holes are a little different. So you can see the growth rings. Now some of this was, I cleaned off or cut it clean with a chisel, so I can see some chisel marks in there too. But you can see the pattern's different here. It's one of the ways you can tell what species of wood. These are the annual growth rings, but you see the little holes there. That's what the grain of the wood, that's the cellular structure of the wood that comes into play with the strength, how you have to work with that. This is all in grain, and sometimes you need to carve that if you're doing something in the round. And there's certain carvings that are all in grain because it has the most strength, but it's also more difficult to carve because you can tend to tear your wood. Now this, again, the red oak has got the big holes, and that's pretty easy to see just visually by eye without enlarging. So that's my enlarging machine, and I play with it a lot with looking at leaves and other things to be able to tell what species of wood something is. So let's go back out to the bench and finish up. I'll show you what works when you're working with a knife and how that comes into play as far as which grain orientation you're working with and just how to work it. Let's say you're looking through materials online or something like that. You find a pattern that you like. A couple of these things are in previous videos. I have a ram and a cat, and I think that's it, and the birds. So these are in previous videos that I'll link to on how I start. And if you're an absolute beginner, I highly recommend you carving a bird. And what helps me because I've done a lot of these birds, I made templates. It might be hard to see here, but they're plastic. And what that helps me with is to know where on a piece of wood that's going to fit. I can advantage the grain. Let's say there's a knot somewhere. I can position this. I can see through the plastic. This dog, however, is a new one for me, and it's a drawing I found on the internet, and I mounted this paper one onto a piece of tag board, and that's what I used to carve this so far. This is just like a Labrador, and I used this pattern to trace it out, and then I drew that same pattern on this same piece of wood. This is white pine. So what's the difference? This is the same bird, but I'm going to turn it around. You see the grain direction. Grain's going horizontal on this one and vertical on this one. And when in a particular carving, when I have it mounted on the base like these two are, the grain of the wood is going horizontal. And that makes a difference when you're like these legs here, the thinner they get, they be rather susceptible to breakage with the short grain going like this. Just imagine your tubes going like that. They're stronger going vertical. So in this carving, which I didn't do, this one's got very thin legs, as you can see, really small. And this, I believe, I think it's carved out of pine, but the strength is in vertical orientation as far as the grain goes. And this would be very vulnerable if it wasn't carved on this rock thing. I think this is a beautiful little carving. And when I acquired it, the horn tips were broken off, and I repaired those, but that's all I had to do to it. So I like how that looks and presents. But this dog here is a Norwegian elk hound, and I got a pattern in a book called Flat Plane Carvings, and I'll link that book. It's very helpful. It's got bigger patterns you can trace and carve. But this grain is going vertical, and that way the legs will have some strength to it. So when you're carving something like this, then you're going to notice as you carve with the grain just certain things you can do. So you got to always go downhill when you're carving. So start from bigger and go smaller. Now if I try to do the same cut on the bird that has vertical grain, it's going to behave differently. So I can, this is basswood, by the way, so this is very accommodating wood. But the beak, when I get down to the beak, it's going to be susceptible to breakage, and then the tail. So the tail is, I have to kind of work it a little differently and with much more care to come with this, because the grain is going to be really short here. Now the knives are sharp, but this is basically cutting end grain. When I'm doing this one, I can just, you can see that actually the difference in how the grain looks. You see the end grain there, and this is horizontal grain. And when you're carving like that, knowing just how you're going to start out and which way the grain is going. This one, it's horizontal. This one's vertical. That's vertical. This is vertical. And I don't think in my little bear carving that would be fine, because it's bulky enough in the limbs that it wouldn't necessarily be susceptible to breakage. But that's all comes into play when you're doing a carving. You got to just kind of decide how you're going to approach it, whether it's going to be on a base. And if it's open like this, you can get access in between the legs and so forth. That's a little easier than having to cut through a block of wood. I'm going to cut this out and finish both these dogs. One is going to be on that little platform and the other is going to be just free standing. So we'll see how that goes. Again, this is the grain of the wood is going up and down or horizontal. So your primary woods for the wood carver, especially beginner, is this is butternut, this is white pine, old white pine, and basswood, or this basswood. So those three are the woods that I recommend. So to recap, you got to start with an idea and look through things that might be of interest. And if you're an absolute beginner, start with something very simple. And then have a sharp tool, have your tools sharp, and you don't need a lot to start with. And then just pay attention to the grain. So go with the grain. That's it for this episode. I appreciate you watching. Thanks for watching, and please give it a thumbs up, and please subscribe if you would. And just stay safe. Just know where your fingers are when you're carving. I do cover that more safety aspect in videos that'll be linked to this. This is primarily to talk about what grain does and how it matters in what you carve. So happy carving, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching.